So welcome everyone again to our workshop, Social Media Research and Information Literacy. Super happy to have you all here today. I will admit, as I was putting this presentation together, I was a little bit more nervous than I usually am. I always try to pick, when I'm thinking about workshops that I want to do, at least one or two that are going to take me a little bit outside of my comfort zone. And this is one of those that takes me outside of my comfort zone a little bit. I'm not really a social media user. And so, thinking about this topic, I had to do some research and do some learning myself. So hopefully you all will forgive me if there are questions that you have that I don't know the answers to, but I hope that we can have a wonderful exploration and discussion and consideration of this issue and thinking about social media and information literacy. My name is Jane Hammonds. I am an assistant professor in the university libraries at Ohio State. I'm the teaching and learning engagement librarian. You can email me at hammonds.73@osu.edu, and I'm definitely happy to talk more with anyone about any of these concepts that we're going to be talking about today. So what we're going to be doing, we're going to think a little bit about what we mean when we think about social media information literacy. Is that something unique or different? Is that a unique form of information literacy? What that might look like? We're going to think about how we might think about incorporating social media into the research process, talk a little bit about some activities and resources that you might be able to use with your students to help them develop social media information literacy. So I wanted to start out by thinking about, what exactly we're talking about when we talk about social media information literacy. So I wanted to share a few definitions really quickly with everyone. The first is just the definition I know that many of you have seen before. This is the definition of information literacy that is provided in the Framework for Information Literacy for Higher Education, which was developed by the Association of College and Research Libraries. So they define information literacy as incorporating the reflective discovery of information, an understanding of how information is produced and valued, and then being able to use information to create new knowledge and participate ethically in communities of learning. So I wanted to share that as a foundational definition as we think about how this might relate to social media. Two other definitions that I wanted to share really quickly. So as I was looking through the definitions of social media information literacy, of course, there was a lot of talk about media literacy and digital literacy. So I wanted to highlight those really quickly. Media literacy primarily is centered around the idea of being able to decode media messages and to understand the influences of those messages on ourselves, on our behaviors, and thinking about how we can create media responsibly. And then digital literacy, it also brings in this idea of accessing, managing, understanding information, and incorporates the use of digital technologies in order to be able to do this. And I don't want to get into the weeds of thinking about how we distinguish between information literacy and digital literacy and media literacy and how those are connected to each other and how those are different, because that could be an entire presentation on its own. But I did just want to highlight those definitions of ones that might influence our understanding of social media information literacy. Thank you for that, Kate. Yeah, that was a Copilot image. So it was a typo. It was probably Copilot. I'm going to bring them. Yeah. Great. So to get us thinking about this idea of whether we need to conceptualize information literacy in a different way when we're thinking about social media, I wanted to have us think a little bit about what we consider to be the key differences between social media and traditional information formats such as books or newspapers. So if you feel comfortable sharing in the chat what you might see as a significant difference between how social media works and traditional information formats such as books or newspapers. All right, so responses here. Several folks are highlighting the idea of like editors or fact checkers or control, right? So yeah, highlighting this idea that there's fewer layers of gatekeeping or control or editorial access, right? Anyone can post anything for sure. Multi-directional and quickness of publication. Yeah, that's a great one, Alicia. Absolutely. Ephemerality. That's a great one, John. Yeah, absolutely. Instant publication. Anyone can set up and post. Yep. lots of opinions on social media. We often receive information passively. Give platforms to people that isn't traditional circulated, edited, unverified, potentially anonymous authors. Yep. Algorithmically based. Lily shared there's a larger barrier to publishing in the traditional formats where social media is open to nearly all. Mm-hmm. Active versus passive. Discoverability is often based on popularity. That's a great one, Cadet. Right? No vetting process, speed, instantaneous, lack of review, uh, accessible to a certain extent, too short to give real support for what they're saying. Yeah, great, Laura. So I think, yeah, you all are hitting on a lot of the same concepts, right? The quickness of the information, the lack of layers of control, the accessibility for anyone to post. Yes, Cadet, removed from original context. Absolutely. So yeah, I think as you all mentioned, a lot of different ways that we can think about these. So you all highlighted the idea of unmoderated or unmediated context. We don't have those layers of control. The idea of bite-sized information folks were talking about. There's the dynamic versus static. Things can be updated and changed so quickly, right? We know that a post that was there yesterday can be updated, deleted, removed, right? So it all just goes really quickly. Wider diversity of content, the formats things are coming in, right? Right, the idea that content is very tailored to individual preferences, right? Right, so there's this sort of lack of common content that we may all be coming in access with. Several folks highlighted the idea of the low threshold to access. So many more people have the opportunity to share, to become content creators with social media than with more traditional information formats. And then last one, I want to highlight this idea of the multiplicity of identities and realities that people can present themselves in many different ways on social media. And the way that you look on one platform can be very different than the way you might look on another platform, or the types of things that you're posting or talking about can be very different on those different kinds of formats. So we can be creating or curating different identities or different even kind of realities on different formats. Right. So as we think about those differences, then I think it's important to think about, okay, so how does this relate to our traditional understanding of information literacy? How does this relate to the way that we think about and teach students what it means to be information literate? So I wanted to dive into that one a little bit more. So I'll put in a link here in the chat, a link to a Jamboard, and you can also use the QR code. It's go.osu.edu/social media jam. And what I'd like you to think about and share your response to, thinking about what social media information literacy might mean, how it might be. You could highlight, how you see it as perhaps being different from a traditional information literacy, what additional components might need to be involved when we're thinking about social media literacy. Are there things that are not incorporated in the traditional definition of information literacy that we would need to include or think about when we think about social media information literacy? So we'll go ahead and go out to the Jamboard. So we have our Jamboard here. If you have not used a Jamboard before, the easiest way to add content is to go over here on the left-hand side, click Sticky Note, and you can type your response into Sticky Note and go ahead and post those. So we'll give folks a chance to respond. And again, you can think about this in different ways. You can try to, come up with a definition of social media information literacy if you would like, or think about how key components that you think need to be included in a definition, how you see this as being different, maybe from our traditional understandings of information literacy. So we'll give folks a chance to respond there if you are comfortable doing so. This may be the last time using a Jamboard in our information literacy series, since it is going away. So we'll take advantage of having it still now and let folks share their responses there. So as I'm looking through and seeing some of the responses, some of the themes that are coming in, several folks are really highlighting the idea of evaluation and how important that is. And obviously that's important in traditional information literacy as well, but maybe in social media, that takes on an even higher level of importance, right? Being able to fact check, recognizing, right, the need for fact checking, recognizing the need to really be skeptical about the information that we are finding, right? So lots of responses tend to seem to be highlighting that as a key aspect of information literacy. Some folks are having responses. See, we have being able to create and curate a social media presence responsibly. Yeah, I think that's a really important one, right? That you are curating your own uh, identity or media presence. Absolutely. Um, Social media, so lots of assessment. Let's see, understanding bias, algorithms, paid ads, right? So I've seen some responses around sort of really understanding how these platforms work, right? That's a really key component of social media information literacy. We have to understand what these platforms are trying to do, how they work, how they function economically, right? So that we can understand, how we use those different platforms or systems responsibly. Great response here. While it's a different world, critical thinking is critical thinking, which I agree, right? So yeah, absolutely. That key idea of critical thinking of obviously is a core of information literacy in general, and also as part of social media information literacy for sure. Yeah, understanding the commercial aspect, absolutely. Being aware of algorithms, so yeah, understanding how these systems work. Several responses in here about sort of emotion, right? The emotional pool, being able to manage your emotions, identifying the strategies that that are used to impact, to play on our emotions, to get us to think or feel or act in certain ways. Yeah, absolutely. Great. So thank you all so much for sharing your responses there. Go ahead and go back to our presentation. Hopefully folks are seeing the presentation again. If you're not, please do let me know. So I went and was looking to see, how folks have been defining social media information literacy. So I found a few different definitions that I wanted to share because they highlight different aspects that I think are really relevant. So this is a definition that I found from 2019. And this is one that I thought sort of most aligned with sort of a traditional definition of information literacy. So understanding when you need information, being able to search, being able to find information, all right, being able to communicate information. It does highlight the bidirectionality of communicating on social media. I like the idea of like the importance of reevaluating information, right? Because this is a more interactive platforms, or these are platforms that tend to be more interactive, that we need to be constantly reevaluating what we're seeing and how we're engaging with information. But this is one definition of social media information literacy that I wanted to share. And then Hess or Heiss and companions developed a description of social media information literacy where they highlight 6 core components. So I wanted to highlight those really quickly. So social media information literacy involving the ability to navigate social media. So being able to find information, especially thinking about being able to find information intentionally, right? A lot of the information that we get through social media comes to us without us having to do anything, right? But if we are searching specifically for information literacy, for information using social media, understanding how to do that effectively. Some folks mentioned this on the Jamboard, but curation, right? So being able to curate sort of our own personal social media feeds, right? Determining what is included, what is not included. Several folks, of course, highlighted evaluation, so appraising, being able to really critically evaluate the information that we're finding, no matter how we encounter it, and determining what is misleading or not. Comprehension, right? So being able to integrate what we are finding on social media with our existing knowledge, adding that necessary context, creating those connections with what we already know. digital creation. So that it gets to that idea of having the actual technical skills and the cognitive skills to be able to create content, and really highlighting, of course, there that we want our students to have a sense of how to do that responsibly, right? And then action as a really key skill that is needed, or right, the ability to effectively communicate or engage with others as a key component of social media information literacy. So that's another definition of social media information literacy. I also wanted to share this definition. So Polanco Leviathan and colleagues talks about, making sure that we're thinking about social media literacy as being, about preventing the risks associated with social media. So not only, mental problems, physical health problems, the problems that arise from interaction, the interactivity of social media, we know can create a lot of challenges about bullying and, shaming of other people, right? And so how we can kind of help our students to prevent the risks that are associated with using social media. They highlight several key components, which we've already talked about. So being able to understand and evaluate, being able to use information, use social media to create content. I like the idea of the knowledge of the implications about sharing our data, thinking about, critically about our own digital fingerprint or footprint. And then they also highlight the idea of management of our interpersonal communication and how important that is when we're thinking about social media. Cho and colleague had a really interesting perspective on social media literacy that I thought was interesting to share. They also highlight 6 components. And so the first 3 that they highlight are how important it is for students to understand themselves, right? So have their own personal knowledge to be able to think about how they are using social media, how they want to use social media, their consumption patterns. So, critically thinking about themselves as a social media user, critically thinking about the media. So as we talked about, understanding how social media platforms work, understanding why they exist, understanding the economic aspects, the technical aspects of these platforms, and how they do differ from more traditional information formats. And then understanding this idea that we talked about a little bit already of the sort of multiplicity of realities and the way that people can present themselves in many different ways on social media. And especially, of course, as we're thinking about AI, this even becomes even more challenging to determine what actually is real and what is not real. So that were the first three components that they highlight. And then the second components that they highlight are ones that we've already talked about: the ability to analyze what they're finding, analyze and monitor their own behavior as well on social media, ability to evaluate the information that they are finding in context with their own beliefs, their own values, their own life experiences, and then being able to develop or share or disseminate information on social media themselves. So those are several different definitions that I found out there. I did want to highlight this quote because I thought it was really interesting to keep in mind that, we want our students to be aware of the dangers of social media. But we also, part of social media literacy would also involve making sure that students are able to take advantage of social media and the affordances that it gives us, right? That there are many good things that can come out of using social media. There are ways that we can connect with others that were not available before. And so as we think about social media literacy, we want to think about it both in terms of protecting our students, helping our students protect themselves from risk, helping students to protect their own content, but also making sure that our students are being able to use social media in ways that are going to benefit them. So I think it's really important to highlight that aspect as well. Okay. So I wanted to pause here. I see there are some comments in the chat. We'll take a look at those. Wanted to see, as we talked about these definitions or descriptions of social media information literacy, what has stood out to you as being really relevant? Or maybe something that you see in these definitions that you don't tend to think about in relation to sort of traditional information literacy. Is there anything that you see that is missing in these definitions? Something that you think is really key for engaging with social media that we haven't talked about? And then just any general questions that you have. So please go ahead and share your questions in the chat. And I'll go ahead and take a look and see what we have here in the chat. So Kate shared it doesn't address liking or sharing. Mm-hmm. Molly, yes, great point. Curation can become echo chambers, right? And that was one of the points that a couple of the authors that we talked about made is that being very critical in terms of curation, that you are deliberately taking steps to avoid that echo chamber issue. Other responses coming in. Social media is usually acquired passively while we are used to searching for information. Yeah, and I think that's a great point, right? It comes at us. We don't tend to seek it out, but we can use social media to seek out information, but it's different often in terms of how we're actually encountering the information. Yes, continue like that continuous. Jackie shared, right? It's the content continues to come after us, right? If we don't stop it, it will just continue to play. Right? One video after the other. We don't have to do anything except do that initial, search or something. Absolutely. A couple of colleagues shared that they often search TikTok for specific content, particularly when they're traveling somewhere new. I was surprised as I thought of it more of a passive platform. That's a great point, Suzanne. And there's some research out there that's talking about people using social media as a search engine, right? And that does seem to be becoming more common. That people are deliberately using social media, in place of doing like a Google search. Teresa shared, I like that someone brought up privacy and personal information. Who are we giving all our information to? And yeah, I completely agree. And I think that's a really important component of social media information literacy is this recognition that we are sharing a lot of data about ourselves and how is that actually being used, right? And we talk about it, you heard the quote, like if the product is free, then you're the product. Right. And so, they are using all the information that we are sharing and what are they actually doing with it? Tammy shared, I find the emphasis on protecting oneself from harm from social media very interesting and distinctive in these definitions. I completely agree. I don't think that you get that in traditional ways that we think about information literacy, that idea of harm doesn't really seem to be as emphasized as much. Right. Whereas these definitions are more specifically highlighting this idea that we can see that there's benefits to these tools, but we can also see that there's a lot of potential for harm related to these tools. John shared, I haven't seen anything about false confidence and stronger than ever assumptions that the kids already know this. Yeah, absolutely. Heather shared, I like to make sure that students understand that info credibility is relative to info need. And sometimes the best type of place to find the information that you need is actually social media. And that is completely, absolutely true. Absolutely, Heather. Yeah, so I would never recommend that we tell students never to use social media. First, it's just not realistic. But second, yeah, it is sometimes a really beneficial tool. Absolutely. Emily shared, I feel that social media encourages more sharing of opinions and feelings rather than fact. So it can't be used as the same news sites or other traditional information sources. Yeah. Yeah. So I think, and that's a really important point, and, it may be, for some of us that are a little bit older, that we have a lot of experience with more traditional information formats, for our students, are they even really going to recognize the difference between these? And, many of our students have never used a print newspaper before. And so, we need to talk to them about what these sites actually entail and what they involve. I think the one thing that really stands out to me in terms of how these kind of definitions differ from more traditional information literacy is the idea of really having that part of social media information literacy is about being able to manage our engagement with others. And it's not that that's not part of sort of a traditional understanding of information literacy, but this idea that we were going to have any kind of interaction with the author of a scholarly journal article or the newspaper article, in past years, other than like writing in a letter to the editor, right? What opportunities did we really have to interact with content creators in the past, right? Whereas now we have so much more opportunity to have direct interaction with the people that we're sharing, and how important it is that we, part of information literacy or social information literacy would be involved understanding this idea of communication strategies. How do we effectively and responsibly engage with others, right? And that for me, I think, was something that really stands out as being maybe a little bit different, that we would have to think about as we're thinking about social media information literacy, that we might not have to have really thought about more with traditional information literacy. And Suzanne, should I think the blurring of lines and information types is super interesting with teaching now? What is an article? What is a blog post? What is it? Yeah, and that's a real challenge in very many ways. I completely agree, Suzanne. I mean, even thinking about it at the level of citations, right? Citations are based on understanding different information formats, right? And if students don't have an understanding of how these different information formats, what these different information formats are, they really struggle to even be able to cite sources. And that's just one level. That doesn't even get to the level of comprehending the purpose of different types of sources, and when it might be more appropriate to use one type of source than another. Absolutely. So Teresa said, I'm interested in hearing other librarians are covering this in one-shots or workshop format. Are we leaving this to faculty? So yeah, folks, please feel free to share how you might be talking about this with others in your work. Absolutely. All right, so we'll go ahead and jump into our next section here. But great discussion going on. So I wanted to talk a little bit about thinking more specifically about the purpose of research, purpose of, or how we might think about using social media as part of the research process. Should we be teaching students to use social media as a research tool? If so, what does that involve? What does that look like? This was a quote, and this was from a few years ago now, but talking about, when we think about teaching students research tools, do we need to go beyond library databases and, Google and Google Scholar? And do we really need to be teaching students to use social media as a research tool? So I wanted to, again, get your all's thoughts on this. So we'll use the same Jamboard. I'll put that link in the chat there as well. And wanted to have you think a little bit about, what do you see as either potential or current uses of social media as part of the research process. So thinking about students either doing sort of like a traditional research paper, or if they're doing experimental research, think of research as big or as small as you would like to think about it. How you see that potential of social media as part of this process. I'm going to go ahead and go out to our Jamboard here. You can use the little caret at the top to switch to the next page of the Jamboard there. And again, you can go ahead and post your response there. So what are the ways that we should be thinking about helping our students consider incorporating social media into the research process? Some of the responses that we have coming in, finding social media posts related to both sides of an issue. Yeah, right. So if we want to see what folks are actually talking about, and what are the different perspectives that people have on this topic. Yeah, finding diverse voices that may not be present in scholarly literature. I think that's a great one, right? We know that there's a lot of gatekeeping around who can be published in scholarly literature for various reasons. There's some benefits to that, but there are some challenges to that. It means certain voices are not heard, right? So social media can be a way to get us to those different kinds of voices that we may not be hearing in traditional, scholarly publishing processes, right? Let's see. Uses a source, eyewitness for primary information. Yeah, so social media as primary sources can be a great jumping off point for designing your research question. Yes, right. What are people talking about? What are the questions that are being asked about this? Right. So it's a good source for starting to develop an understanding of a topic, seeing the perspectives that people are sharing on a topic. Absolutely. One place to step into the scholarly conversation. Yeah, that's a great one as well, right? Start engaging with other researchers, engaging with other scholars on the source, researching topics, considering, yeah, those different kinds of blogs or other kinds of posts as part of those scholarly conversations for sure. Right, locating opinions, images, commentary. Yeah, teaching in the context of the information cycle. Yes, that's a really important point. That I think helping students understand how this information is developing and being shared in comparison to other types of information. Absolutely. Yeah, these are all such great responses. And thank you to the person that was organizing them all so clearly. So yeah, lots of ways that we might think about uh, helping our students or encouraging our students to incorporate social media into the research process. So these are the ones that I highlighted, and I think all of these were ones that you all shared in your own responses, right? So students can use social media as a way to locate information on a topic, especially if we're thinking about information that's outside of the traditional scholarly publishing process, if we want to bring in more diverse voices. I put a link there to some like social media search engines, some guides to like finding people and sources on social media. Uh, somewhat was, I think a few folks mentioned there the idea that social media is a primary source, right? So thinking about, we don't have handwritten letters anymore, but we have posts on social media that can be used as primary sources and videos and images, right? So these are like the new primary sources for the digital age. Thinking about research at sort of a big level, high level research, students that are doing their own studies can use social media as a way to get information out there about their study, recruit research participants, right? Someone mentioned this on the Jamboard, but interacting with scholars, professionals, researchers in your field. So it's kind of like seeing that scholarship as conversation in real time. Here's what the scholars and researchers in my field are talking about. Again, if you're doing your own, students are doing their own research, it's a great way to promote and share their own research findings and sort of engage, as we talked about, with other scholars. And then they also might use social media as the subject of the research themselves, right? There's a lot of great research questions that folks can ask about social media. So there are more that you all shared in the chat, but just, I wanted to highlight the different ways that we can think about how our students might be using social media as part of the research process, or how we might want to be encouraging students to think about using social media as part of the research process. Keeping in mind that we also have to, help make sure that our students are understanding the concerns that are addressed with using these kinds of tools as part of the process. These are just some resources that I wanted to share. I'm not really going to spend any time looking at these in depth, but I looked and found a few different institutions that have put together like social media research guides. So I wanted to share with everyone those. I wanted to highlight this one from the Ringling College of Art and Design. I'm going to talk about this a little bit more coming up, but they had a really great section on their guide where they take each of the 6 core concepts from the Framework for Information Literacy and they connect those to social media and information literacy in really interesting ways. So I encourage folks, if you're thinking about how you can teach different core concepts, and I'm going to highlight a few of those in just a second. But I thought that was a really helpful guide for me as I was thinking about this topic. So I don't know who put that together, but thank you, whoever put that together. So I'll pause here really quickly and just talk about, are there other ways that people think about that we can encourage students to incorporate social media into the research process? Are there concerns that you have? I would love to hear, are there folks out there that are, deliberately teaching students to use social media as part of the research process and what that might look like for you? So we'll pause there to see if there are any questions, comments, thoughts that folks would like to share around using social media as part of the research process. Check the time. Kate shared using social media to find thought leaders and members of communities of practice. Yes. Um, I think that's a really great way that we can get our students thinking about a very positive potential use of social media. Brooke shared, I think it's a really great way to demonstrate and explain information silos. Yes, absolutely. Completely agree. I think one of the ways that's really key for me, I know that some folks probably remember I've done like presentations before on this idea of inclusive citation or citation justice. And several folks had mentioned, on the Jam board, this idea of being able to bring in voices that, can't make it through the academic gatekeeping process, right? So increasing the diversity of voices that we might be listening to. I think that's really important. Rashida shared, seen it discussed around marketing, advertising, the whole business or specific products and how they are focusing on a specific demographic. Yes. Mm-hmm. Let's see, Jennifer shared, as folks noted, the passivity of how we usually interact is a problem. See if I can get back to that. Oh my God. I lost it. Let's see. But if students are incorporating it thoughtfully into their research, that's a more active interaction. Yes, right. It may result in more critical thinking on their part. Absolutely. I can see the theft of ideas. Yeah, we're going to talk about that one in just a second. It can humanize academia and research. And that is a really great point, Rachel. I really love that, right? Because thinking about, if we encounter just sort of those traditional scholarly journal articles, right? It's just someone out there that we don't know and we know nothing about them, right? And, are we even noticing their names? We're just reading the research, right? But recognizing that this content is created by actual people, right? I think that's a really great yeah, also, yeah, marginalized voices. I think that's really great. See, I work with an instructor who has their students work to make social media content from things that they've learned in their class and make accessible content about their knowledge. I think that's a really interesting way to utilize and teach social media. Yeah, I love that. That's a great idea as well, right? Having students use social media to share what they have learned, right? Make it accessible to others. Absolutely. I love that idea. Talking about citing social media sources make the idea of citation click for some students. Yes, absolutely, Cadet. Yeah. Um, Wonderful. Great. Thank you all so much. All right. So for the last part, I just want to spend a few minutes thinking about some teaching strategies and activities, which some of you have already been indicating as ones that could potentially use. I think a great potential way to talk about this social media with students is helping it, students use this to follow scholarly or professional conversations related to their particular research topic and their field, depending on what level students are, especially as they're moving up, higher levels and into graduate school, being able to start participating in the scholarly conversations that are taking place in their field. So you could talk to students about the idea of scholarship as conversation, have them identify scholars in their field that they could highlight or professionals in their field that they want to follow, use those to identify other professionals that they want to follow. Thinking about the idea of inclusive citation, I had a tweet here from Mahabali who talks about, using this to identify scholars from underrepresented groups in your field, right? So start following a scholar, a BIPOC scholar in your field, and then they're probably citing other BIPOC scholars or talking to other BIPOC scholars in their field. So it can help you kind of expand and create more diversity in the scholars that you're engaging with and talking to in your field. And then students could reflect on, what are the benefits and challenges of using social media to follow these conversations and engage in these conversations. We could help students develop their own sort of social media plans. We talked a bit about this idea of curation, right? So how students present themselves on social media, we know is going to be important. So talking to them about what their goals are for using social media. Are they planning to share their research? Are they trying to use social media to network to find a job, right? So how they can curate and think about how their own personal message, who their target audience is, what platforms are going to work best, right? If they're looking to, connect with other academics in the field, what are academic social networks that they might need to be a part of? So that could be something that we could talk with our students about. And these are just a few links to articles that I found about how academics are using social media, and guides and tips for academics, making those connections on social media. So those could be great sort of articles that you could have students talk about and read as part of a discussion on this topic. So this is one of the ones I wanted to highlight that was on that guide from the Ringling College of Art and Design. And I really love this idea of talking about this concept of authority is constructed and contextual through the idea of influencers. And so, we know authority is constructed and textual. It talks about, how authority is built up over time, but it could be different in different contexts. Just because you're an expert in one field does not mean you're an expert in another field. So you could talk about what that means in terms of influencers. How do influencers build their authority? Do influencers actually have authority? Do they have expertise? Do they have popularity? Right? What is the difference between popularity and expertise or authority? So I think this could lead to some really great discussions about this idea of how we determine who we're going to trust and who we're not trusting. And I had this come up, really clearly with an example. A student in one of my classes a couple years ago, and all of the sources that she was citing were from influencers, and that was like the first time that I had encountered that with a student. So we talked a little bit about, within the academic context, what are the types of sources that are going to be considered authoritative or credible, and this person may have a ton of likes and followers, but is that going to translate into expertise within the academic context? And so that was a really interesting discussion to be able to have with that student. So the folks had mentioned in the chat the stealing of content, right? And this is a great way that we could talk with our students about the idea of information having value, right? They may struggle with the idea of plagiarism in the academic context, or, but it may become more salient to them if we talk about and thinking about, content being stolen from content creators, and how do we determine who the original creator or author is when things, travel so fast, right, across social media, and what does it mean to someone if their content is stolen? How does that influence them as a content creator? And how, we know that our students are content creators themselves. So talking to them about how they can create or how they can protect their own content. And, what recourses they might have if they feel that their content is being stolen. So I think this is a great way to get into some really cool discussions about, the value of information and considering sort of citation and attribution, what it looks like on social media versus what it looks like in the traditional academic context. Rabbit holes, research in rabbit holes. This is another one from the Ringling College of Art and Design. I thought this was really interesting. We talked about this idea of research as inquiry, and it's this ongoing discussion and conversation. And I know one of the questions I often get from students is like, when do you know to stop researching? And so you could talk about that within the context of rabbit holes. And someone had mentioned, right, one video plays, the next video plays, the next video plays, and how it takes us in places where we may not have expected to go. And sometimes that can be really good, right? One of the key parts of research as inquiry is recognizing this idea that serendipity is part of the process. And sometimes we may end up in a place where we don't expect, but that's very good. But other times we can end up with in a place that we don't expect that can be bad, and it can lead us, thinking about radicalization, right? As we encounter more and more and more information that leads us in a particular direction. So we could talk to the students about rabbit holes and how they might be able to avoid that. Evaluation, obviously, we talked a lot about evaluation already, but we could share with our students fake and real social media posts, and talk to them about the strategies that they use to determine whether or not, are they actually using these strategies? What kind of critical thinking are they applying? There are fake tweet generators and fake social media post generators, and how do we know what's real and what's not? And so we can talk about what are the strategies that we think are effective for critically evaluating social media. We could also talk about their responsibilities for ethically sharing and creating social media. Here's just a few resources I wanted to share on evaluating social media, just a few guides for folks. And then the last thing, we like to have students create infographics a lot in the classes that we teach. The credit-bearing classes, so not generally in a one-shot session, but students could create a social media, create infographic around social media. For example, 3 key concerns with social media. They could also do, benefits of social media, guidelines for evaluating social media. There's a lot of different ways that they could do this, identifying platforms related to social media. But as part of this, they would do something like they would have to provide the appropriate attribution. They would license their own products so that they would get experience what it means to pick a Creative Commons license, or if that's what they wanted to apply. And then they could think about how they would share their own content that they created on social media. So to get them some practice doing that as well in a responsible way. So lots of different options. So those are just a few of the sort of ideas or options that we might have for how we think about and could engage with students in social media, with social media as we're teaching them. Right. So pause there. We have a few minutes left. Surprisingly, I think this is like the quickest I've finished in quite a while. So I wanted to open it up to some discussion here. So if you have key takeaways that you would like to share from the session, I would love to hear those. If you have action steps, something that you're planning to do based on what we talked about today, I would love to hear that. And then any questions that you might have, I would love to hear those as well. And you can add those to the chat. And you can also, if you prefer, go ahead and raise your hand and you can unmute. And again, also, if you have ideas for lessons that you can share with folks, we'd love to hear that as well. So pause here to open it up to any discussion, questions, comments that folks would like to share. So Rashida shared, plan on discussing authority versus influence versus expertise. Yes, great. I think that discussion, I think, is really, really fascinating. So when do social media posts become primary research pieces, and how do we help students ethically use and cite them? Could you theoretically do a systematic review using social media filters rather than a conventional database? Those are really great questions. The idea of the primary, when sources become primary sources or not, that could actually be a really great discussion, because we know that students sometimes have trouble with this concept of primary and secondary sources. So perhaps talking about it in the context of social media, right, could be a way that would make that a little bit more salient to students than the kind of traditional discussions that we've had about primary and secondary sources. So I think that those could be really interesting discussions. Yeah, could you do a systematic review using social media filters? That would be really interesting to see what that would look like, and especially in terms of the peer review process. How would reviewers react to a systematic review that was done using social media rather than conventional databases? Absolutely. Teresa shared, key takeaway for me, students citing social media can make it click for them, maybe because they have more experience with this than journal articles. Yeah, that's a really great point, right? We know our students are using social media. They've been using social media now for most of their lives, probably all of their lives for some of them, right? About like YouTube came out like 2005, right? So our students now that have been having YouTube their entire life. So, that's a form of media that they are more familiar with, and thinking about citation and attribution in that context may be a little bit more relevant to them. Absolutely. So Jackie shared, I think social media could and should be incorporated into the lateral reading discussion. Yes, absolutely. Right. We tend to talk about, how students could use social media as a way to verify, right, the information that they are finding. That could be something, absolutely. Suzanne shared, I like the idea of challenging students to think about when content is an example of a data void or conspiracy theory, and when it is an example of underrepresented and marginalized voices. Yes, I love that idea. And that's a really great point. Right. We want our students to be open to a diversity of voices, but we also recognize that not all of those voices are going to have the same level of credibility, right? And so, what is the limits between opening up to newer, different voices, and allowing simply uncredible, um, information that is not credible, right, to enter our discussion for sure. Absolutely. Wonderful. But so we have a few more minutes in case anyone has any additional questions or comments that they would like to share. So we have references and resources here, our images attributions here as well. So Lisa shared, I think it's important that we require citations from multiple sources, social media just being one key that they can choose from. We have to educate our students at a high standard and not fall into this rabbit hole. Yeah, great point, right? Would it be concerning if all of the student sources were ones that they found on social media? Depending on their project, I could see a way why that they would want to use a lot of social media sources, but we would also likely want them to have to be able to ground them in the context of the scholarly discussion that was taking place on that topic, for sure. Mm-hmm. All right, so thank you all for being here today. I will stick around for a couple of minutes, but I hope you all found this discussion to be helpful, engaging. I certainly did. It was great to hear everyone's thoughts and opinions and ideas around how we might help our students to engage with social media.